In the last reading, we looked at the practical teaching of the first Arcanum, the Magician, which was where we were told to learn concentration without effort and to transform work into play. Now I'm going to finish the reading of this Arcanum with the theoretical teaching, which is going to primarily be focused on the method of analogy. And got the camera on this time because there's only one diagram, but I'd still like to show it to you. This is the book we're reading from, Meditations on the Tarot. What is the theoretical teaching of the Magician? It corresponds in every point to the practical teaching, its theoretical operation being only the mental aspect of the practice. Just as the latter proceeds from concentration without effort, that is, puts unity into practice, so does the attendant theory consist in the basic unity of the natural world, the human world, and the divine world. The tenet of the basic oneness of the world plays the same fundamental role for all theory as that of concentration for all practice. As concentration is the basis of every practical achievement, the tenet of the basic unity of the world is the same with regard to all knowledge. Without it, no knowledge is conceivable. The tenet of the essential unity of all that exists precedes every act of knowledge, and every act of knowledge presupposes the tenet of the unity of the world. The ideal, or ultimate aim, of all philosophy and all science is truth. But truth has no other meaning than that of the reduction of the plurality of phenomena to an essential unity, of facts to laws, of laws to principles, of principles to essence or being. All search for truth, mystical, gnostic, philosophical and scientific, postulates its existence, that is, the fundamental unity of the multiplicity of phenomena in the world. Without this unity, nothing would be knowable. How could one proceed from the known to the unknown, and this is indeed the method of progress in knowledge, if the unknown had nothing to do with the known? If the unknown had no relationship with the known, and was absolute and essentially a stranger to it? When we say that the world is knowable, that is, that knowledge as such exists, we state through this fact itself the tenet of the essential unity of the world or its knowability. We declare that the world is not a mosaic, where a plurality of worlds which are essentially strangers to one another are fitted together, but that it is an organism, all of whose parts are governed by the same principle, revealing it and allowing reduction to it. The relationship of everything and of all beings is the conditio sine qua non of their knowability. The open recognition of the relationship of all things and beings has engendered an exactly corresponding method of knowledge. It is the method generally known under the title, the method of analogy. Its role and its import in so-called occult science has been illumined in an admirable way by Papus, also by Mebes. Analogy is not a tenet or postulate. The essential unity of the world is this, but is the first and principal method, the aleph of the alphabet of methods, whose use facilitates the advance of knowledge. It is the first conclusion drawn from the tenet of universal unity. Since at the root of the diversity of phenomena their unity is found, in such a way that they are at one at the same time different and one, They are neither identical nor heterogeneous, but are analogous insofar as they manifest their essential kinship. The traditional formula setting forth the method of analogy is well known. It is the second verse of the Emerald Table of Hermes Trismegistus. That which is above is like to that which is below, and that which is below is like to that which is above, to accomplish the miracles of the one thing. This is the classic formula of analogy for all that exists in space, above and below. The formula of analogy applied in time would be: that which was is as that which will be, and that which will be is as that which was, to accomplish the miracles of eternity. That which was is as that which will be, and that which will be is as that which was, to accomplish the miracles of eternity. The formula of analogy applied in space is the basis of typological symbolism, that is, of symbols expressing correspondences between prototypes above and their manifestations below. The formula of analogy applied in time is the basis of mythological symbolism, that is, of symbols expressing correspondences between archetypes in the past and their manifestations in the present. Thus, the magician is a typological symbol. He reveals to us the prototype of the man of spirit. Whilst the biblical accounts of Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, and if you wish, also the schism d'Yeshu of Saint-Yves d'Albadère, are on the other hand myths, they reveal the archetypes which manifest themselves endlessly in history and in each individual biography. They are mythological symbols pertaining to the domain of time. These two categories of symbolism, based on analogy, constitute through their mutual relationship a cross. Here is something written on myth, that is, on the symbolism of time or history, according to our definition by Hans Liesgang, the author of a classic book on Gnosis. Every myth expresses, in a form narrated for a particular case, an eternal idea, which will be intuitively recognized by he who re-experiences the content of the myth. And this is what Mark Haven says concerning typological symbols in the chapter of symbolism in his posthumous book, The Tarot. Our sensations, symbolizing external movement, do not resemble them, that is, the phenomena, any more than the undulations of sand in the desert resemble the wind which raises it up into sand dunes, or any more than the ebb and flow of the sea resembles the combined movements of the sun and moon. They are symbols of it. The opinion of Kant, Hamilton, and Spencer, which reduces inner movements to simple symbols of a hidden reality, is truer and more rational than naive realism. The author's note. Science ought to resign itself to being only a symbolism conscious of itself. But the symbolic has quite another significance. The science of sciences, as it was called by the ancients, the universal and divine language, which proclaims and proves the hierarchy of forms from the archetypal world down to the material world, and the relationships which unite them. It is, in a word, the living and tangible proof of the kinship of beings. Above, therefore, two definitions of symbols of time or of myths, and of that of space or of the correspondence of worlds, from the archetypal world down to the material world, are formulated, the one by a German savant, Hans Liesegang, and the other by a French hermeticist, Mark Haven, which express exactly the idea of the two types of symbolism, mythological and typological, which we are setting forward here. The Emerald Table only alludes to typological symbolism or space, analogy between that which is above and that which is below. This is why it is necessary to add to it, by extension, the corresponding formula pertaining to mythological symbolism or time, which we find, for example, in the book of Genesis of Moses. The distinction of these two forms of symbolism is not entirely devoid of practical import. It is owing to their confusion that many errors of interpretation of ancient sources, including the Bible, must be attributed. Thus, for example, certain authors take the biblical account of Cain and Abel as a typological symbol. They want to see in it symbols of centrifugal and centripetal forces, etc. However, the story of Cain and Abel is a myth. It expresses in a form narrated for a particular case an eternal idea. Consequently, it refers to time, to history, and not to space and its structure. It shows us how brothers can become mortal enemies through the very fact that they worship the same God in the same way. The source of religious wars is revealed here, and it is not the difference in dogma, nor that of cult or ritual, which is the cause, but uniquely the pretension to equality, or if one prefers, the negation of hierarchy. Here also is the world's first revolution, the archetype of all revolutions which have taken place and which will take place in the future of humanity. For the cause of all wars and revolutions, in a word, of all violence, is always the same, the negation of hierarchy. This cause is found already, germinally, at such a lofty level as that of the communal act of worship of the same God by two brothers. This is the staggering revelation of the story of Cain and Abel. And as murderers, wars, and revolutions continue, the story of Cain and Abel remains ever valid and relevant. Being always valid and relevant throughout the passage of centuries, this is a myth, and, moreover, a myth of the first order. It is the same with the accounts of the fall of Adam and Eve, the deluge and Noah's Ark, the Tower of Babel, etc. These are myths, that is, in the first place, historical symbols referring to time, and not symbols expressing the unity of the worlds in physical, metaphysical, and moral space. The fall of Adam and Eve does not reveal a corresponding fall in the divine world, within the womb of the Holy Trinity. Neither does it express directly the metaphysical structure of the archetypal world. It is a particular event in the terrestrial history of mankind whose importance will cease only with the end of human history. In a word, it is a true myth. On the other hand, it would be erroneous to interpret, for example, the vision of Ezekiel, the Merkaba, as a myth. The vision of the celestial chariot is a symbolic revelation of the archetypal world. It is a typological symbol. It is that which, furthermore, the author of the Zohar so well understood, which is why he took the vision of Ezekiel as a central symbol of cosmic knowledge, according to the rule of analogy that which is above is as that which is below. For the Zohar knows this rule well. Not only does it make implicit use of it, but also it gives it an explicit expression. It is thus that we read in the Zohar, "For as it is above, so it is below. As all the supernal days are filled with blessing by the heavenly man, so are the days here below filled with blessing through the agency of man, that is, the righteous." India also has her version of the Hermetic maxim. Thus, the Vishvasara Tantra states the formula: what is here is there, what is not here is nowhere. The use of analogy is not limited, however, to the accursed sciences, magic, astrology, and alchemy, and to speculative mysticism. It is, truth to tell, universal. For neither philosophy, nor theology, nor science itself can do without it. Here is the role that analogy plays in the logic which is the basis of philosophy and the sciences. 1. The procedure of classification of objects on the basis of their resemblance is the first step on the way of research by the inductive method. It presupposes the analogy of objects to be classified. 2. Analogy, argument by analogy, can constitute the basis of hypotheses. Thus, the famous nebular hypothesis of Laplace was due to the analogy that he observed in the direction of the circular movement of the planets around the Sun, the movement of satellites around the planets, and the rotation of the planets about their axes. He concluded, therefore, from the analogy manifesting itself in these movements, their common origin. 3. As Maynard Keynes says in his Treatise on Probability, scientific method, indeed, is mainly devoted to discovering means of so heightening the known analogy that we may dispense as far as possible with the methods of pure induction. Now, pure induction is founded on simple enumeration and is essentially only conclusion based on the experience of given statistics. Thus one could say, as John is a man and is dead, and as Peter is a man and is dead, and as Michael is a man and is dead, therefore man is mortal. The force of this argument depends on number or on the quantity of facts known through experience. The method of analogy, on the other hand, adds the qualitative element, that is, that which is of intrinsic importance, to the quantitative. Here is an example of an argument by analogy. Andrew is formed from matter, energy, and consciousness. As matter does not disappear with his death, but only changes its form, and as energy does not disappear, but only modifies the mode of its activity, Andrew's consciousness also cannot simply disappear, but must merely change its form and mode or plane of activity. Therefore, Andrew is immortal. This latter argument is founded on the formula of Hermes Trismegistus: that which is below, matter, energy, is as that which is above, consciousness. Now, if there exists a law of conservation of matter and energy, although matter transforms itself into energy and vice versa, there must necessarily exist also a law of conservation of consciousness, or immortality. The ideal of science, according to Keynes, is to find the means to elaborate the scope of known analogy so far as to be able to do without the hypothetical method of pure induction, that is, to transform the scientific method into pure analogy based on pure experience, without the hypothetical elements immanent in pure induction. It is by virtue of the method of analogy that science makes discoveries, in passing from the known to the unknown, formulates fruitful hypotheses, and pursues a methodical directing aim. Analogy is its beginning and its end, its alpha and its omega. In that which concerns speculative philosophy or metaphysics, the same role was reserved there for analogy. All conclusions of a metaphysical nature are based only on the analogy of man, nature, and the intelligible or metaphysical world. Thus, the two principal authorities of the most methodical and most disciplined philosophy, medieval scholastic philosophy, St. Thomas Aquinas and St. Bonaventura, of whom one represents Aristotelianism and the other Platonism in Christian philosophy, not only make use of analogy, but also assign it a very important theoretical role in their doctrines themselves. St. Thomas advances the doctrine of analogia entis, the analogy of being, which is the principal key to his philosophy. St. Bonaventura, in his doctrine of signatura rerum, interprets the entire visible world as the symbol of the invisible world. For him, the visible world is only another Holy Scripture, another revelation alongside that which is contained in the Holy Scripture properly said. And he quotes here from Bonaventura. And it thus appears that the entire world is like a single mirror full of lights presenting the divine wisdom, or as charcoal emitting light. Saint Thomas and Saint Bonaventura have been proclaimed by Sixtus V in 1588 and again by Leo XIII in 1879 as two olive trees and two chandeliers shining in the house of God. You see, therefore, dear unknown friend, that we are able, you and I, to declare openly our faith in analogy and proclaim aloud the formula of the Emerald Table, consecrated by tradition, without appearing thereby to be infidels to philosophy, science, and the official doctrines of the Church. We are able to use it in good conscience as philosophers, as scientists, and as Catholics. There is nothing to be said against it according to these 3 points of view. But the sanction, according to analogy, does not stop here. The Master himself has endorsed it by the use which he made of it. As well as the parables, the a fortiori argument which he made use of in his sayings demonstrates it. The parables, which are ad hoc symbols, would be devoid of sense and purpose if they were not statements of analogous truth made in the language of analogy and making appeal to the sense of analogy. With respect to the argument a fortiori, its entire strength lies in analogy, which is its foundation. Here is an example of an a fortiori argument employed by the Master. What man of you, if his son asks him for bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, will give him a serpent? If you then, who are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father, who is in heaven, give good things to those who ask him? It's from the book of Matthew. Here we have the analogy of terrestrial kinship, human, to celestial kinship, divine, on which is founded the force of the a fortiori argument, where how much more is the result of imperfect manifestation in relation to the ideal prototype. The analogy of father and father is the essence here. At this point, a feeling of unease could arise in the conscientious reader. There are many arguments and authorities cited in support of the method of analogy, but what is there here as an argument against this method as regarding its weaknesses and dangers? Well, it must be acknowledged quite plainly and frankly that the method of analogy presents to many negative sides and many dangers, errors, and serious illusions. This is because it is entirely founded on experience, and all superficial, incomplete, or false experience is bound to give rise to superficial, incomplete, and false conclusions, by analogy, in a direction parallel with the experience from which they are the outcome. Thus, in making use of insufficiently powerful telescopes, canals were seen on Mars, straight continuous lines, where it was inferred by analogy that those canals must be artificial, and that, consequently, the planet was inhabited by civilized beings. Now, the subsequent perfecting of telescopes and exact observation has demonstrated that the canals are not at all continuous, but that they display breaks and are not rectilinear as they first appeared. The argument by analogy, therefore, loses its value in this case, owing to the error of experience on which it was based. With respect to the occult sciences, Gerard van Rynberg has published, in his tarot book, a table of astrological correspondences of the tarot according to different authors. There, for example, the seventh card, the Chariot, corresponds to the sign of Gemini, according to Attila, to Sagittarius, according to Formelhout, to Gemini, according to Schorl, to Sagittarius, according to an anonymous author, to the planet Mars, according to Basilide, to the planet Venus, according to Volguin, to the Sun, according to Eli Starr, to the sign of Libra, according to Snyders, to the planet Venus, according to Mucheri, to the sign of Cancer, according to Crowley, and to the sign of Gemini, according to Kurzan. Here, the relativity of the correspondences obtained by means of the method of analogy is readily apparent. But on the other hand, the concordance of correspondences between the metals and the planets obtained by the same method is maintained by ancient, medieval, and modern authors. Greek astrologers of the 4th century BC, continuing the Babylonian tradition where gold corresponds to the sun and to the god Enlil, and silver to the moon and to the god Anu, accepted the following correspondences: gold Sun, silver Moon, lead Saturn, tin Jupiter, iron Mars, copper Venus, and Mercury. The same correspondences were accepted by astrologers and alchemists of the Middle Ages, and again today by all authors in the occult sciences and hermeticism, including Rudolf Steiner and other anthroposophical authors, which correspondences you will find in the book by Papus Traité élémentaire de science occulte. On the subject of the universality of these analogous correspondences between the planets and metals, I may add that the 44 years of my studies and experiences in this domain have not led me to modify anything in the table of given correspondences, and that, on the contrary, they have supplied numerous proofs, direct and indirect, which have confirmed their truth. It must be concluded, therefore, that the method of analogy on the one hand is in no way infallible, but on the other hand it is qualified to lead to the discovery of essential truths. Its effectiveness and value depend on the fullness and exactitude of the experience upon which it is based. Let's just see if Let us return now to the Arcanum, the Magician. As concentration without effort finds expression in the whole picture of the card, as well as in all its details, and thus constitutes the practical Arcanum here, one also finds expressed in it the method of analogy, which constitutes the theoretical Arcanum. For, seen from the level of the intellect, the practice of the method of analogy corresponds completely to the practice of concentration without effort. Also, it appears there not as work, but rather as play. The practice of analogy on the intellectual plane of consciousness does not, in fact, demand any effort. Either one perceives analogous correspondences, or one does not perceive or see them. Just as the magician or juggler has had to train and work for a long time before attaining the ability of concentration without effort, similarly, he who makes use of the method of analogy on the intellectual plane must have worked much, that is, to have acquired long experience and to have accumulated the teachings which it requires, before attaining the faculty of immediate perception of analogous correspondences, before becoming a magician or juggler who makes use of the analogy of beings and of things without effort, as in a game. This faculty constitutes an essential part of the realization of the task that the Master charged his disciples with. Truly I say to you, whosoever does not receive the kingdom of God like a child shall not enter it. The little child does not work, he plays. But how serious he is, that is, how concentrated when he plays. His attention is still complete and undivided, whereas with he who approaches the kingdom of God, it becomes again entire and undivided. And this is the arcanum of intellectual geniality, the vision of the unity of beings and things through the immediate perception of their correspondences, through consciousness concentrated without effort. The Master did not want us to become puerile. What he wanted is that we attain the geniality of intelligence and heart which is analogous, not identical, to the attitude of the child, who carries only easy burdens and renders all his yokes light. The magician represents the man who has attained harmony and equilibrium between the spontaneity of the unconscious, in the sense given to it by Jung, and the deliberate action of the conscious, in the sense of I or ego consciousness. His state of consciousness is the synthesis of the conscious and the unconscious, of creative spontaneity and deliberately executed activity. It is the state of consciousness that the psychological school of Jung calls individuation, or synthesis of the conscious and unconscious elements in the personality, or synthesis of the self. This synthesis renders possible concentration without effort and intellectual vision without effort, which are the practical and theoretical aspects of all fruitfulness in both practical and intellectual realms. Friedrich Schiller seems to have had consciousness of this arcanum when he advanced his doctrine of the synthesis between intellectual consciousness, imposing heavy burdens of duties and of rules, and the instinctive nature of man in the Spieltrieb, the urge to play. The true and the desired must, according to him, find their synthesis in the beautiful, for it is only in the beautiful that the Spieltrieb renders the burden of the true or the just light, and raises at the same time the darkness of instinctive forces to the level of light and consciousness. In other words, he who sees the beauty of that which he recognizes as true cannot fail to love it, and in loving it the element of constraint in the duty prescribed by the true will disappear. Duty becomes a delight. It is thus that work is transformed into play, and concentration without effort becomes possible. But the first arcanum, the arcanum of practical and theoretical fruitfulness, whilst proclaiming the effectiveness of serious play, which is the complete tarot, contains at the same time a serious warning. There is play with capital P and play. There is the magician, capital M, and the magician. This is why anyone who confuses lack of concentration with concentration without effort, and streams of simple mental associations with the vision without effort of correspondences by analogy, will necessarily become a charlatan. The arcanum of the magician is twofold. It has two aspects. He invites us on the path which leads to geniality, and he warns us of the danger of the path which leads to charlatanism. I must add that often, too often, alas, The teachers of occultism follow the two paths at the same time, and that which they teach contains elements of genius mixed with elements of charlatanism. May the first arcanum of the tarot be always present before us as a kind of guardian of the threshold. May he invite us to cross the threshold of work and effort in order to enter into activity without effort and knowledge without effort. But may he at the same time warn us that the more we go beyond the threshold, the more work, effort, and experience on this side of the threshold will be indispensable for the attainment of real truth. May the magician say to us, and may he repeat it each day, to perceive and to know, to try and to be able to, are all different things. There are mirages above as there are mirages below. You only know that which is verified by the agreement of all forms of experience in its totality. Experience of the senses, moral experience, psychic experience, the collective experience of other seekers for the truth, and finally, the experience of those whose knowing merits the title of wisdom and whose striving has been crowned by the title of saint. Academia and the Church stipulate methodical and moral conditions for one who desires to progress. Carry them out strictly before and after each flight into the region beyond the domain of work and effort. If you do this, you will be a sage and a mage. If you do not do this, you will be only a charlatan. And then there's an appendix, an historical note concerning the Emerald Table, which I don't think, no. Okay, that's it. So, concentration without effort and the method of analogy. That's what we should take from that. And to not be charlatans.